Hey guys, welcome back to more crazy neighbor stories from Reddit. In this video, OP's crazy neighbor pulled the trigger because OP was fishing at his own lake. Let's dive right into the video. A few years after my parents unfortunately passed away, I finally worked up the courage to actually move into the cabin they had left me. The will had been read shortly after their passing, but I'd been too grief-stricken to do anything about the inheritance. I'd been renting it out to cover property taxes, not wanting to fully accept that they were gone. However, after a time of hardship, I decided I needed a fresh start, and their final gift to me, that's how I like to look at it. I was very glad I made that decision because what came with it changed my life. Along with $50,000 of their savings, they left me their fishing cabin. What I didn't realize during all those childhood visits was that my parents actually owned the entire lake and the surrounding lands. I'd always assumed it was public property or that they had just rights to fish there, but it turns out they owned it all, and now so did I. I was set for life. I moved into the lake cabin and spent the $50,000 doing some work on the old wood and replacing broken windows and doors, making it more livable. Although the surrounding cabins were relatively dispersed, they were close enough to be considered my neighbors and all surrounded the stunning lake in the center of the grounds. For the first few months of my new life living in the cabin, I had a wonderful time getting to know my neighbors. Everyone was lovely and so excited to see that I'd finally moved in permanently. As it turns out, most of them had known my parents well and remembered me from childhood visits. They were thrilled to see that I decided to carry on my family's legacy there. It was sweet, really. During these interactions, I was warned of one neighbor called Dirk. According to my other neighbors, he was a right pain, stopping at nothing to ensure people were being told off for whatever small reason. I eventually bumped into Dirk when I was at the local farmer's market buying some pork from the butcher. "Do you know the conditions those animals live in before he kills them?" someone I'd never spoken to said over my shoulder. I turned around. "Well, I actually buy from local farms that—" "It doesn't matter," the man interrupted. "They're still murdered for your taste buds. You're paying for suffering." "Dirk, I've told you before to stop harassing my customers." The butcher sighed heavily. Ah, so this was Dirk. Dirk and the butcher had a short argument while I was standing there, pondering what everyone had been saying. Dirk was short and not very muscular and just all around unintimidating, which somehow made it even worse that he had such a righteous attitude. The butcher eventually had to threaten to call the market manager before Dirk would back off. "Sorry about that." The butcher apologized once he had gotten Dirk to angrily storm off to whatever hole he had crawled from. I paid for my meat and then left, hoping I would not encounter him again, but I was wrong. During my time in the cabin, I found my father's old fishing gear tucked away in the back shed. This brought new tears to my eyes, remembering how much we had loved to fish together. I also remembered all the times I would say I was too old to go fishing with him or just generally refuse, and now I would give anything to go fishing with him. I decided I would learn how to fish properly in his honor, a sort of thank you for trying to teach me all those years ago. After watching some videos and reading a couple fishing books, I took my bait to the water and set up camp for the day. I'd looked up beforehand the laws of this lake, and because I owned it privately, I was free to fish in it as much as I wanted. To make matters even better, it was currently overcrowded due to too much fish reproduction, so fishing in said lake would actually benefit the majority of the species by reducing competition for resources. I'd spent half the day fishing, feeling like I was present with my dad again, and I could almost hear my mother calling us in for lunch. Just when I was feeling most relaxed, I heard a grating voice from behind me. "What do you think you're doing?" "Dirk, I'm fishing, Dirk." "You cannot do that. That is so cruel to the animals." "It is not cruel. This specific lake is even overcrowded. The fish are dying because there are not enough resources for all of them. I'm actually helping maintain the ecosystem." "Do you know they will die when you take them out of the water?" "Well, yes, because I'm not planning on eating fish that are still alive." I rolled my eyes. Dirk went pale as he stared at me in shock. "You're planning on eating these fish?" "Well, I'm not just fishing for fun. That would actually be animal cruelty. Just catching and releasing for sport." Dirk spent the next half an hour shouting at me for fishing, claiming it was cruel and that he couldn't believe I would then eat the poor creatures. I did see where he was coming from in terms of caring about animals, but it was not like I was fishing industrially or running some kind of commercial operation. And once more, the fish in the lake were dying anyway because there were simply too many of them competing for limited food and oxygen. After a while, I gave up and decided to pack up my things and head inside. It was not peaceful anymore, and I was just getting frustrated with his yelling. Dirk ended up grabbing all of my fish, there were only 3, and dumping them back into the water, which was just a complete piss take. Wow, that was really mature, I muttered as I walked away. Dirk smirked as he smugly walked back to his home, thinking he had won this war. But now I really wanted to keep fishing, just out of principle. The following afternoon I got all of my gear out again and went to the same spot. I laid everything out and began fishing, once more relishing in the peaceful nature of the lake. I also brought some bird seed for the nearby birds, creating a cute choir of chirping behind me. I ended up being able to fish for several hours before Dirk came out, and by that point I was pretty much done. When I saw him walking over, I shut and locked my cooler, which had my caught fish inside. I'd only caught around 4 fish, I clearly needed some practice. "Are you really out here again?" Dirk yelled as he stormed over. "Dirk," I began, standing up to my full height and towering over him. "I own all the rights to this lake and can do as I please with it, including fish in it." "You do not." "I do, seriously. This lake falls under the property boundaries in my deeds for that cabin." I pointed to the cabin I lived in. Dirk went silent for a minute, clearly pondering his next move. "I don't believe you," was what he decided to go with. I rolled my eyes and started walking back to my cabin. He stepped in front of me though and put his hand out. "Give me the fish." I sidestepped him and carried on walking. It turns out he was quite easy to get around. I went into my house and shut the door firmly, hearing as he pounded on it dozens of times. He eventually left, but I could tell he was fuming. That night I cooked up my fish, deciding to pan-fry them for my dinner. The smell of butter and herbs clearly caught some attention, because it wasn't long before I heard shouting from outside. "Are you doing what I think you're doing?" I heard from outside, looking out of my window to see the one and only Dirk standing in my yard. Another argument ensued through the window, but I ended up not replying after a few exchanges and just ignored him while I ate my dinner. After a while he went silent and walked away, but I had a bad feeling about the reason for his sudden disappearance. That's when I heard it. He came back and fired 2 shots near my house, right next to the window I was standing at. Any closer and they would have blasted through the window and right into my head. It was obviously he was not trying to aim for me, but instead scare me, but that didn't make it any less terrifying. Nonetheless, I'm not having someone trespass on my property and then attempt to threaten me in my own home. "Not so tough now, are you? Maybe you'll think twice before murdering innocent creatures. People like you deserve to die," he yelled, and the way he said it made my blood run cold. This wasn't just some eccentric neighbor anymore, this was a legitimate threat. I did not respond and immediately picked up the phone, calling for the sheriff's office. I explained what happened, the harassment, the trespassing, and now the shooting. My hands were shaking as I gave my statement, and before I knew it, the sheriff was outside talking to Dirk. "Officer, I swear I was not aiming for him," Dirk yelled. "Dirk, that has nothing to do with the fact that you trespassed on his property and fired a weapon near his home. You were clearly sending a signal that you're a threat. This is a serious matter. You could be charged with assault, terroristic threats, and reckless endangerment, do you understand that?" They argued for a while, however. Dirk ended up calming down once he began realizing the extent of his situation. The sheriff confiscated his rifle and took detailed statements from both of us. "I'm taking you down to the station," the sheriff told Dirk. "You will likely be released on bail, but this is serious." The sheriff then turned to me. "I'm going to help you file for an emergency protective order. Given what just happened, a judge should grant it pretty quickly." And he was right. The sheriff took my statement and helped me fill out the paperwork that night. After some time, a judge had reviewed the incident report and granted the order, which prevented Dirk from approaching me or my property, and he was also forbidden from any contact whatsoever. For a week I didn't hear anything from Dirk and carried on fishing as normal. I was relishing in the peace. I felt I was truly embracing the memory of my parents and was proud of myself for honoring them this way. It was hard, I was mourning all over again, but this time it felt real. It felt like I was healing. One morning when I was going outside to fish, I noticed the water looked cloudy and smelled strongly of chemicals, not the usual fresh-like smell. When I looked closer, I was horrified at what I saw. Dozens of fish had already floated to the surface, dead, and I could see more floating up as I watched. Over the next few hours, hundreds more died. It was a terrible sight to see. I felt awful for the poor fish that had been mass murdered like this. "I cannot fish anymore, can you?" Dirk said from behind me. I spun around. "Dirk, you've killed all the fish in the lake, what's wrong with you? You also violated the protective order to come here and do this?" Dirk looked over at the lake and for a moment I saw horror flash across his face. Clearly, this was not his intention. I don't think he realized how devastating it would be. "What did you think would happen if you poured whatever poison you did into the lake?" "I thought they would swim away from it further out to the waterways," Dirk whispered. Well, the lake was connected to a larger network of water sources through a creek, so in theory the fish could have swum away from the poisonous environment, but that's not always how nature works. Fish have territories, breeding grounds, established habitats. Dirk, they have clusters of eggs they won't abandon. They have established territories, and more to the point, it didn't look like they had the time to swim away. Just look at them. "Well, at least they are free now and won't have to face the torture of being hooked and cooked," Dirk yelled before storming off my property and back towards his home. I had enough at this point. He had destroyed the lake ecosystem, which fell entirely under my property. Not only that, but he had violated a protective order. I immediately called the sheriff back, and I also did some digging online and discovered that the house he lived in was owned by someone else, and he was just renting. I contacted the property owner and told him everything, submitting photos of the lake and documentation of the protective order violation. They were horrified and said they would begin eviction proceedings immediately. Apparently this was not even Dirk's first incident with them. He had had noise complaints and other issues against them. The sheriff came out, documented the scene, took water samples, and arrested Dirk for violating the protective order, and that was enough to hold him immediately. Over the following days, the district attorney's office began building a case for the environmental destruction, the property damage, and the previous incidents, and a few months later, after extensive documentation and legal proceedings, there was a court hearing for him. I was asked to attend as a witness. Dirk saw me enter and went bright red, but he couldn't say anything to me because of the protective order. Surprisingly, Dirk admitted everything when questioned by his landlord's attorney. "I put cleaning chemicals in the lake so that the fish would leave and he could not murder them anymore." Dirk pointed over at me. "He was fishing and eating them. Someone needed to stop him." The judge looked at the evidence briefly and stated, "The protective order violation alone is sufficient cause. You got 1 week to vacate the premises." The protective order remains in effect. He then noted for the record that he was forwarding the case file to the district attorney's office given the apparent criminal conduct. Over the following months, Dirk faced separate criminal proceedings too. The DA took it seriously because of the environmental damage and the pattern of escalating behavior, harassment, threats, shooting near my home, and then the poisoning. He eventually took a plea deal rather than go to trial. He was sentenced to pay me restitution of $10,000 for the cost of remediating the lake, along with 500 hours of community service with an environmental conservation group, which I found somewhat ironic. He also got 2 years of probation. The money was used to have the lake professionally cleaned and remediated by an environmental company. They tested the water, removed contaminated sediment where needed, and ensured it was safe. Then I had it restocked with appropriate fish species in the right numbers. It took almost a year, but it has since flourished and is a thriving ecosystem once more. I still fish there regularly, and it feels like my parents are with me every time. Dirk, however, is not thriving. I heard through the neighbor grapevine that he's been struggling to find a place to live. With the eviction and criminal conviction on his record, several landlords have turned him down. I almost feel bad for him, but then I remember the hundreds of dead fish floating in my lake and the sound of gunshots by my window. I still live in the cabin. I've made it truly mine while honoring my parents' memory. The lake is beautiful again, and I'm finally at peace. And the next one is titled, "I resigned during a meeting with a huge client." Posted on r/revenge. And by the way, this one is super satisfying. If you enjoyed the story so far, please don't forget to like the video, since that would help me tremendously. So some years ago, I worked at a digital agency who was actually a big player in the national scene. It was me who was responsible for maintenance and availability for some software used by our core clients, and I ran the team who did the same for other clients. Year after year, I got denied raises or got a pay rise. That is just laughable. Asked so many times for a partner or sidekick as I was drowning in work, but they didn't feel the need as I was still able to keep it running while I was simultaneously running myself into the ground. Here comes the 6-month performance review, and yet again I voiced my concerns about my well-being and financial situation, and yet again I was denied anything. Well, unbeknownst to them, I was offered a position at a competitor, granting me better pay and better workloads. After the performance review, we had an in-person meeting with the second biggest clients for contract renewals, and as I was responsible for maintenance, I was also included as to give input on SLA conditions and pricing. During that meeting, I was rereading the offer, which my manager saw, mailed the competitor, I accepted their offer, and got the contract in my email within 5 minutes and digitally signed it within 10. Mailed HR, my manager, and some executives my resignation. By the way, fun fact here is that all the executives I mailed were also in the meeting, and it didn't take long for faces becoming red with anger, and they paused the meeting, got pulled apart and got questioned, "What the F am I doing?" explained my side of the story, and then was met with utter disbelief. My manager and HR got chewed out, I got better pay and better working conditions at the competitor. Also, the client renewed their contracts that year but left the year after because of inadequate maintenance and the company not being able to meet the 99% uptime SLA. Careers popping off, my old employer is downscaling business because of a harsh market. And the next one is a malicious compliance story, which is titled, "Trying to performance manage me out of a job? I'm up for the challenge." So years ago, I worked for a supervisor who just did not like me. No reason why, since I just came to work, did my job and went home at the end of the day, but he decided that I was terrible at what I did and decided to performance manage me out of my job. Game on. He wrote me up for some vague BS and asked me to sign it, but since it didn't show any hard facts and data, I asked for examples of this. The meeting ended with document unsigned since he didn't have an example for this, tried it again with an example this time, and I asked how often this would be reviewed for feedback, how the feedback would be given, and how the improvement or non-improvement would be measured. He hadn't have a solid answer, so again, no document signed, and the meeting ended. The next time we had HR in the meeting and had all his documentation and the answer to my questions from the prior meeting. He decided to be so smart on how feedback would be given daily via email. I signed the paper and he gave a smug smile. Next day comes along and shockingly there was zero feedback given, no emails sent for the rest of the week, get called into a meeting with boss and HR with a paper saying there was no improvement and I was being put on warning for termination, and oops, I'm sorry, but can you show me the emails where feedback was given daily as outlined? There were none, so the meeting ended. Next day, emails sent with feedback. I responded with facts and data, but no response. Day after emails sent with feedback, again, responded noting that I hadn't gotten any follow-up for the day before and responded to that day's email with facts and data. Third day, I again noted that I hadn't gotten any answers to the prior 2 days' questions and added facts and data for this one. Then I CC'd the HR person and sent it back. Well, apparently after much discussion, boss decided that it was too hard to performance manage someone out of a job and my work was suddenly just fine after all. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. Back in the 2008 housing crisis, I did some work on the site for a customer's computer system. We got to talking and he had a cheap 1-bedroom duplex for rent that was too good to be true. It was a detached garage and, well, it was converted to a 1-bedroom little apartment and it was as plain and basic as they come. The actual house was being rented out and he was charging the full amount priced for the area, which was high, so the little garage conversation was pure profit for the landlord. I signed a lease for a fixed price that was almost half of what the going rate was for 1-bedroom apartments in the area. It was no frills, plain as can be, with the cheapest appliances and amenities possible. Light fixtures from the early 80s, cheapest faucets and countertops money could buy, you get the visual. The elderly landlord and I had an arrangement. I could fix it up so long as I could keep the rent low and he would allow me to pay for the remaining balance on upgrades if/when things broke. Years go by and I'm still in this 1-bedroom garage conversation and making progress on updating the features. Kitchen faucet is gone, new fancy sprayer head faucet with a bar-style glass cleaner installed. Old toilet replaced with a water-saving tank and bidet installed, 80s lights are gone, LED smart home fixtures installed. Around 7 to 8 years go by and my rent is still half of the normal going rate for the area and my landlord is happy with our arrangement. Sadly, he has a heart attack and surgery saves his life. He is no longer able to maintain his active lifestyle and hands the reins of being a landlord to a property management company. This company is as shady and money hungry as they come. They get a percentage of the monthly rent for their role in taking over the landlord's duties. They immediately hate me and my rental agreement from the start. The month they take over, my rent goes up the maximum limit of 10% plus 5% the cost of living increase for 1 year. I'm not happy with this as this is a significant bump in my costs. I suck it up, but as a silent protest, I stop making upgrades to the house that first year. The 12 months later exactly, I get a notification that my rent will increase another 10% plus 5% cost of living increase. This is yet another blow to my finances, but I cannot really complain as my rent is still well below the average cost for the area. Another 12 months and another 10% plus 5% cost of living, followed by another the following year. This whole time I'd been saving a good portion of my paychecks as a down payment for a house, but these rent hikes were hurting my ability to set aside money for this purpose. My landlord was not happy with the property management company he hired, but couldn't get out of his contract because they were doing maintenance and facility repairs like clockwork. Then the pandemic hit and I'd been in this place for 12 years by this point. My rent was still under the average for the area, but not by much. Seeing as this was now just a crappy one-bedroom apartment, I was now looking for houses to buy to get me out of this rent gouging arrangement I was in. Right at the peak of the pandemic in 2020, a pipe burst in the kitchen and floods the floors, ruining the crappy cabinets, the carpets, and the furniture I had nearby. I had renter's insurance that covered most of the costs to what I had lost. Not the nicest furniture, but my couch was a total loss, my desk, entertainment center, and my speaker were severely damaged. In comes property management to assess the repairs and gut out the damaged woods and carpets. I offered to pay for the upgraded wood and countertops as well as request hardwood floors. But nope, they deny my requests. I offered to do the work myself as I'm fairly handy, again denied with an actual written letter stating I'm not to do any work or maintenance on the apartment. So then I contact my landlord, who has his hands tied because this was the arrangement we had. I'm at a loss of what to do because this property management company is not setting me up with a temporary place to live. Doing all the work while I'm working from home to watch my possessions, there is a literal door-sized hole in my wall as they spend 2 weeks fixing all the damage. They also throw out my upgraded faucet, which was undamaged and worked perfectly fine, the upgraded sink, the light fixtures, the tile work I had done, the bathroom faucet, which was not even part of the floor damage. They then removed an outlet originally part of the apartment to save on costs. I was pissed at them and complained via letters, via phone calls, and talking to the maintenance supervisor. It took 2 full months to do all the repairs, and at the end they sent me a notice that my rent was going up due to some loophole in the neglect the apartment was in and not reported. I was done with this BS and I pooled my resources, called in all the favors I could, and found the house I wanted. I then gave 30-day notice to leave at the end of my lease along with an invoice of all the repairs I made to the apartment over the 12 years I was there. I attached a copy of my original lease agreement, a copy of all photos I took of before and after repairs I made, a bill of the cost and a request of a refund of the past 6 months of additional rent hike due to neglect like they stated in the letter. I had a running tally of with all the receipts, work performed, and the cost of not being allowed to live in motel during the work being performed to over $9,700. At the same time, I submitted all this to the courts as I knew they would contest all of it. My landlord was on my side during the court hearing, giving testimony he in fact allowed me in the rental lease agreement that I could do my own repairs. I won within 4 hours and was awarded $4,700. And by the way, the judge removed all billable hours I included. The judge was harsh to the lawyer for the property management, saying his client must obey the law and put a tenant up for housing during construction. And then, nearly 4 years later, I finally got my lump sum including penalties and late fees, which totaled up to $7,500. Sadly, my old landlord passed away and his properties passed to his son, who immediately fired the property management company sometime early last year. And before we end the video, let's read one more petty revenge story. This one is titled Girl with Perv at a Bus Stop. So I was 19 and living on my own, but I could not afford a car, so I used public transportation, which was fine, but it meant having to transfer buses on the Nicollet Mall in Minneapolis. Only buses are allowed on this mall road, and it could be a bit sketchy and scary at night. One night I had left my mom after sitting with her to hospital until it was pretty late. Obviously, I had to take a bus to get home, which meant transferring at the mall. It was dead of night, so I was grateful to see the area appeared to be empty, and as I entered the lit up plexiglass bus shelter to wait for my bus home, I kept alert of my surroundings, and it wasn't long before a man came striding down the mall. He walked tall and with purpose, so my heart was pounding with fear as he approached the glass window. Suddenly, he whips his long coat open and exposed himself to me. I was scared to death, which for some reason made me giggle, so I glanced up at the man's face mid-laugh and said, "Yep, that looks like a cucumber, only smaller." He yanked his coat shut, hunched over, and actually ran away. I guess I did not give him the fear reaction he was looking for. And damn guys, I'm so sorry that this happened to OP, but her reaction was perfect. Either way, thank you for watching, I will see you again tomorrow.